It was interesting this week to see reporting from the Wall Street Journal saying that the Trump administration apparently is exploring lifting sanctions on Eritrea, and the timing of this is interesting as well, given the sort of disruption that we're seeing with the Strait of Hormuz. How do you read all of this?
Yeah,
Is it a coherent Red Sea strategy?
yeah. Here's the deal, Jim. I think every U.S. administration has tried to normalize relations with Eritrea. During Trump 1, when I was Assistant Secretary of State, I did my best. I went to Asmara, sat down with them. I even said publicly, I think in Senate testimony, that the goal of the United States of America is to have the same positive relations with Eritrea that we have with Ethiopia. We discussed several ideas, and it just turned out that the Eritreans were incapable of responding positively. When I was ambassador to Ethiopia, I became pretty good friends with Prime Minister Meles. And Meles and Isaias, had been kind of colleagues in war against the Derg in
Hmm.
freeing
That's the
Ethiopia.
president of Eritrea,
Yeah,
Isaias.
yeah, freeing Ethiopia from the communist Marxist dictatorship. They kind of fought together, and then they went their separate ways. Eritrea became independent because not both of them could be the leader of a unified Ethiopia, Eritrea. And then you had the Ethiopian-Eritrean War when Isaias invaded Ethiopia over a boundary dispute. And Prime Minister Mello said, Isaias, he's a really smart guy, but every day he wakes up a new person. You never know what he's going to do that day. And unfortunately, I found that to be true because I thought we had very positive discussions in Asmara, and they never ever followed up on that. I think Isaias, the president of Eritrea, understand that if he was to totally normalize relations with the U.S., then the pressure would start on turning his nation, which I characterize as a massive prison camp. He would have to start, lessening some
Africa's
of those,
North Korea, they call it.
yeah, lessening some of those pressure points. And, you know, I mean, no constitution, never an election, national service until you're 90 years old. You can be jailed, tortured, executed for anything kind of thing. And I think normalization, the pressures would start mounting. So I think that philosophically, the regime probably would want to have openings, but practically speaking, they know that the walls would start crumbling, with normalization, with business. I mean, if you visit, I don't know if you've been to Asmara, but
Never been. I
if
would
you've,
love to go for
okay,
the architecture, if nothing else.
yeah, yeah, it's a good, gorgeous. If you visit, you have to take $100 bills, but the $100 bills have to be new. Of course, there's no internet. It is beyond bizarre, and yet it's a charming country. The people are fantastic, but they are just beholden to this gruesome government. So I wish the current Trump administration well, but I just don't see it happening. For the
Mm.
Trump administration, it would make much more sense to go with Somaliland, especially since now formal relations with Israel, appointment of ambassadors, from each country. I mean, you can sign a piece of paper of establishing relations, but when you actually have physical present ambassadors in each other's capitals, that's a huge step forward. And
Mm.
so I just don't understand why the current White House doesn't see the logic in that.
Absolutely. Ethiopia is obviously another key country we're watching, the key country to watch, I'd say, in the Horn of Africa. We're about a month away from a national election. The U.S. reportedly now has concerns that the government is preparing to go to war with Eritrea over Red Sea access. We've been hearing similar
Yeah,
narratives for
yeah.
forever, and obviously there's still tensions in the north. Tigray is far from resolved. What are some of the friction points that you're looking at ahead of this election? And it doesn't look like Tigray itself will be able to vote
Yeah.
in the election because the mandate of the interim administration has been extended for another year, right?
It's
So
been
that's quite
extended for another
tricky.
year, but then recently the TPLF, kind of kicked them out of power, and there's a split in the TPLF. There's a split in Tigray. The TPLF's not going to be
Hmm.
allowed to vote in the elections. I,
Hmm.
I,
Will the
I
people be able to vote? The people of Eritrea, sorry, of
Tigray,
Tigray?
I don't see, I just don't see how it's going to happen. And I really, I love Ethiopia. I served there twice. It's a unique, special nation. It could be one of the biggest success stories in the world, not just in Africa. But they really desperately, desperately need national reconciliation. Just having an election is basically putting wallpaper over rotting walls.
Hmm.
I don't think it's going to solve anything, and keeping the TPLF from being able to register to run in the elections. Personally, I think it's a huge mistake. We, the United States, made a horrendous mistake when we toppled Saddam Hussein, of doing away with the party, because it was ingrained into the nation. And, as a result, there was tremendous suffering. And the TPLF, as you well know, because you know the region very well, it is ingrained in the DNA of Tigray. And sure, over time there will be opposite, opponents and competitors
Like
and things like
Getachew
that. But
Reda's party,
yeah, well, pardon me. Yeah.
like Getachew Reda's own party. Hmm. Would you go as far as saying that the national elections, the federal election, will not be credible if Tigray is not able to participate?
Well, they might be credible in a large part of Ethiopia, but obviously, if Tigray is not allowed to participate, that's a huge defect.
Hmm.
I'm just sorry
And
that it's going in this direction, because I said recently that there's two Ethiopias. There's the Ethiopia that outside world and outside investors see, which is quite
mm,
positive. Good news, good news. But then there's the Ethiopia that's inside, that really has a lot of fractures which are needless, because the government, if you remember, the government, when the Abiy government came to power, it was hugely popular. Everybody wanted it to succeed. It was going in a great direction, and now you have all of these fissures in Amhara, fissures in Tigray, certain fissures still in Oromia.
yeah, absolutely. One of the key things the government has been doing, whether you believe it or not, is focusing on this national reconciliation process. I think there is a recognition within the government that this is something that's needed to hold the country together. Obviously, they've been traveling the regions, talking to people, not just to promote, I guess, healing after the war in Tigray, but to figure out how Ethiopians themselves see the future of the country. Is the federalist system itself the issue here? Because
That's
that's what I'm hearing from people.
Yeah, that's a huge, huge question, a huge issue, and that's obviously something that the Ethiopians themselves are going to have to deal with. Ethnic federalism, philosophically, it made good sense, when it came in, but as you and I both know, that kind of federalism works when a nation is rich. It works wonderfully in Switzerland, even though you have three ethnic groups there who hate each other, basically, but they get along because they're dividing riches. When you have the same system where people are having to divide poverty, and fight for the scraps, then it doesn't work so well. So Ethiopia's tried the unitary state during the emperor. It was basically a unitary state with the princes, the Rosses, in control of certain areas. It was, to a certain extent, unitary and feudal, in some respects. Then you went to the Marxist dictatorship again, which tried very strong unitary control, centralized control. That didn't work well either. Then you tried the ethnic federalism. Part of the problem may be the citizenship rules, that each of the states, establish their own citizenship rules, and whether you can be a citizen of that state, what's required. So yeah, the system obviously needs some revision, but again, I mean, that has to be the Ethiopian people, and however they do it, The bottom line has to be that the people themselves see it as legitimate and credible.
If you had one message for the government, and it's twofold, for the government, but also for the people ahead of the election, what would that be? If you
Wow.
could speak directly to the
Well,
government.
yeah, if I could speak directly to the government, I would say to please make the election as universal as possible and give every single Ethiopian a real opportunity to vote, but not just to vote, but to have a real choice of their own desire. And if there's a party they want to vote for, do everything possible to legitimize that party.
Excellent. And to the people,
Wow. I hate to say patience.
mhm,
The only thing I can
it's
say
getting
to the
old.
people is that at the end of the day, all people in every country must remember that the country belongs to them and the government is their servant and their steward. It's, the state does not belong to the leadership, it belongs to the people.